Prologue. On the outskirts of Crescent Hollow, where the paved roads turned to gravel and the streetlights gave up their fight against the dark, there stood a weathered house that nobody looked at twice. Paint peeling, shutters hanging crooked, surrounded by overgrown weeds that choked what used to be a garden. Behind that house, the wilderness began. Dense forests stretching for miles, folding into the ancient territory of the Shadowpine wolves. Trees older than memory, roots deeper than secrets, and silence that held its breath. Inside the small house, chaos reigned. Thunder cracked overhead like bones breaking. Rain hammered the roof with the fury of 1,000 fists. The storm had turned the night into something wild and angry, as if the sky itself was screaming. But upstairs, in the cramped second bedroom, a girl slept through it all. 17-year-old Sarah Whitlock. Even in sleep, she was striking. Copper-red hair splayed across a threadbare pillow, pale skin that bruised too easily, gray eyes that, when open, held storms of their own. She had the kind of beauty that came with a price, the kind that made cruel people crueler. Her kindness was her rebellion. In a world that had only ever hurt her, she still fed stray cats, still whispered comfort to frightened birds, still smiled at strangers who never smiled back. Tonight, she dreamed. Downstairs, the television blared. Action movie gunfire. Explosions. Shouting. Volume turned up so loud the walls vibrated. It was his way of claiming territory, of making sure she knew he was still there. Her stepfather, Marcus Whitlock. A hulking man with meaty fists and eyes like dead coal. His black hair was streaked with premature gray, his face perpetually red from drink and rage. He'd married Sarah's mother 6 years ago, and when she died 3 years later in what the police called an unfortunate fall down the stairs, he'd kept Sarah like unwanted furniture. The neighbors knew. They always knew. But nobody knocked on doors in Crescent Hollow. Nobody asked questions. Upstairs, Sarah's body twitched beneath thin covers. No blanket tonight. He'd taken it as punishment for using hot water. The room was freezing, November wind seeping through gaps in the window frame. Her lip was split, a fresh wound from this morning when she'd accidentally looked him in the eye. She'd learned years ago not to cry where he could see. Tears only made him angrier. But in her dream, there were no tears. Only freedom. She was running, not in her frail human body, but as something else, something powerful and wild. A wolf with silver-white fur that gleamed like moonlight on snow. Her paws barely touched the ground as she raced through an endless forest bathed in golden twilight. The air tasted like pine and possibility. Her muscles moved with perfect grace. For the first time in years, maybe ever, she felt whole. She had never felt so alive. Never felt so free. No stepfather. No fear. No cold. No hunger. Just wind and earth and the pure joy of movement. Until everything changed. The golden light bled away like a wound. Smoke rose from the forest floor, thick and black as oil. Trees erupted into flame without warning, fire climbing their trunks like vengeful spirits. The forest was burning alive. Sarah skidded to a stop, but she was already surrounded. Flames on all sides. Smoke filled her lungs. The warmth that had felt like freedom now suffocated her. She ran forward, fire. Turned back, more flames. Her paws slipped on burning leaves. Heat seared her fur. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Her legs gave out. She collapsed onto scorched earth, vision darkening at the edges. And then she saw him. Lightning split the sky with a sound like the world cracking open. Through the wall of flames stepped a massive wolf, easily 3 times her size. His coat was midnight black with silver markings along his spine that seemed to glow in the firelight. His eyes burned amber gold, ancient and aware. He was terrifying. He was magnificent. He looked at her like he'd been searching for centuries. Sarah tried to reach for him, tried to call out. She woke screaming. Her eyes flew open to darkness. Sweat soaked through her shirt. Her throat burned as if the smoke had been real. Her fingers clawed at the sheets, panic flooding her veins like ice water. It took several seconds to remember where she was. Still night. Still raining. Still alone. Or so she thought. Her breathing came in short, sharp gasps as she blinked, trying to clear her vision, trying to ground herself in reality. That's when she saw the shadow. A figure stood in her doorway, broad shoulders, unmoving, watching. Her stomach dropped. When her vision cleared, her blood turned cold. Marcus stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light. His posture was rigid, swaying slightly from whatever he'd been drinking. And in his right hand, he He held something long and coiled. A length of electrical cord. Her eyes went wide. Her body locked. He tilted his head slowly, like a predator assessing prey. His voice came out slurred but venomous. "You woke me up, little rat." He took a step forward. The cord hissed against the wooden floor. Sarah's fear shattered into something else. Something desperate. She had been silent for so long. 3 years of swallowing screams. 3 years of making herself small and quiet and invisible. But tonight something broke. Her voice tore from her throat, raw and primal. "Help!" She screamed at once. Twice. The word echoed off the walls. But no one came. Not the neighbors. Not the storm. Not the universe. Just Marcus, stepping forward with the cord raised high. Chapter 1. The Silent Girl. Sarah Whitlock had not spoken a word since the age of 9. The day her mother died, officially ruled an accident, though Sarah knew better. Something inside her had sealed shut. She remembered standing at the top of the stairs, watching the paramedics carry the sheet-covered body out the front door. Marcus had stood beside her, his hand gripping her shoulder so hard it left bruises. "You tell them it was an accident," he'd whispered in her ear. "You tell them she slipped. You say one wrong word, and you'll follow her. Understand?" Sarah had nodded, and she had never spoken again. The doctors called it selective mutism, trauma-induced. They gave Marcus pamphlets about therapy and support groups. He'd thrown them away the moment they left the hospital. From that day forward, her home became a nightmare dressed as normalcy. Bruises became her second skin. Silence became her armor. She learned to move through the house like a ghost, to anticipate his moods, to make herself so small he might forget she existed. She never did. At school, she was the weird girl, the mute, the one who sat alone and never raised her hand. Teachers barely called on her anymore. They'd learned she wouldn't respond. Her grades were excellent. She turned in perfect papers and aced every test. But she remained invisible. That morning, after Marcus had finally passed out drunk on the couch, Sarah moved quietly through the house. She packed her school bag with the few scraps of food she could steal from his stash. A granola bar, an apple with a soft spot, a can of off-brand cola. She dressed in her school uniform. Gray pleated skirt, white button-up shirt, navy cardigan. She pulled on her oversized black hoodie over everything, letting the hood shadow her face. The sleeves hung past her wrists, covering the finger-shaped bruises on her forearms. The morning sky over Crescent Hollow was heavy with clouds that promised rain. The air smelled like wet concrete and pine needles. Sarah walked the familiar route to Crescent Hollow High, her boots scuffing against the sidewalk. The streets were waking up slowly. A coffee shop owner flipped his sign to open. A bus groaned past, belching exhaust. An old woman swept her porch steps. Nobody looked at Sarah. She preferred it that way. The school gates came into view. Red brick building, chain-link fence, students clustering in groups like wolves in packs. She kept her head down and slipped through the entrance. Inside, the hallways buzzed with the usual chaos. Lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking, laughter and shouting bouncing off the walls. Sarah moved through it like smoke. A group of girls stood near the water fountain. As she passed, one of them, Madison, captain of the dance team, whispered loudly enough to be heard. "There's the zombie girl. I heard she can talk but just chooses not to," another girl added. "Like, how dramatic." "Maybe she's cursed," a third one giggled. "My mom says her mom died under weird circumstances." Sarah kept walking. Their words slid off her like rain off glass. She'd heard worse. A boy, tall, athletic, with the kind of smile that had gotten him out of trouble his entire life, stepped directly into her path. "Move, freak," he said, shouldering past her hard enough that she stumbled into the lockers. She caught herself, didn't react, just straightened her bag and kept going. In first period English, she sat in the back corner. The teacher droned on about symbolism in some novel Sarah had already read twice. She took notes mechanically, her handwriting small and precise. At lunch, she sat alone on a bench behind the gym, unwrapping her stolen granola bar. The bread was stale, but she ate it anyway. Across the field, students laughed and played. Someone threw a football. Someone else screamed about a test. The world spun on without her. The bell rang. She returned to class. Then the next one. Each hour bleeding into the next in a blur of lectures she didn't hear and faces she didn't see. Chapter 2. A Glimpse of Fate. The hallway smelled like floor wax and teenage desperation. Sarah walked toward her locker at the end of the day, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with schoolwork. When she reached her locker, she stopped. Someone had vandalized it again. This time, they'd taped printed-out memes to the door. Pictures of ghosts with captions like, "When you're so boring you disappear," and "Mute equals useless." Someone had drawn an exaggerated sad face in permanent marker. Sarah stared at it for a long moment. Then she opened her locker. Inside, her textbooks had been rearranged. Pages torn from her notebook. A half-eaten sandwich shoved into her pencil case. She cleaned it out silently, shoving the mess into the trash can nearby. She didn't cry. Hadn't cried in years. When she closed her locker, she turned and nearly collided with someone. A boy. No, not a boy. Too young to be in high school. Maybe 12 or 13. He had messy auburn hair and bright hazel eyes that sparkled with mischief. He was running, laughing, being chased by a group of friends. He tripped over his own feet. Instinct kicked in. Sarah reached out and caught his elbow before he hit the ground. "Whoa. Thanks," he said, breathless and grinning. She nodded. He studied her face for a second, like he was memorizing it. Then his friends called his name, and he was off again, disappearing down the hallway in a blur of laughter and chaos. Sarah watched him go, something unfamiliar flickering in her chest. Warmth. She stepped outside into the late afternoon light. The sky had cleared, leaving behind pale gold sunlight that painted the parking lot in soft amber. That's when she noticed them. Two massive black GMC trucks sat at the edge of the lot, polished to a mirror shine. Around them stood a group of men, 4 or 5 of them, all in their early 20s. They were tall, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed. There was something wild about them, something untamed beneath their casual clothes. And then she saw him. The boy she'd helped ran up to the tallest of the group. A man who stood slightly apart from the rest, hands in the pockets of a dark jacket. He had black hair that fell just past his ears and a jawline sharp enough to cut glass. The boy pointed back toward the school. Toward her. The man turned. His eyes locked onto hers. They were amber gold. Bright and burning, like molten metal. Not human eyes. Something older. Something other. Sarah's breath caught. He didn't smile. Didn't wave. Just looked at her with an intensity that made her feel seen for the first time in years. It wasn't threatening. It was recognizing. Like he knew her. Like he'd been waiting. Heat flooded her cheeks. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She looked away quickly and walked faster toward the road that led to her part-time job. She didn't dare look back, but she felt his gaze on her the entire way. Sarah's job was at a corner store called Finch's Market, 15 minutes from school on foot. It was a small place, cramped and warm, smelling perpetually of fried dough and coffee. The owner, Mrs. Finch, was a round, kind woman in her 60s with graying curls and flour permanently under her fingernails. "There's my girl," Mrs. Finch called when Sarah walked in, the bell above the door jingling. "Hungry?" Sarah nodded. Mrs. Finch pulled out a stool behind the counter and set down a plate of rice, stewed chicken, and greens. "Eat first. Work later." Sarah ate slowly, savoring every bite. Mrs. Finch never asked questions, never pried. She just offered food, safety, and a place to exist without fear. The afternoon shift passed in quiet rhythm, stocking shelves, running the register, sweeping the floor. Customers came and went. When the sun began to set, Mrs. Finch locked the front door and patted Sarah's shoulder. "Get home safe, sweetheart." Sarah waved and stepped out into the dusk. The walk home was short but heavy with dread. She prayed Marcus would be out, prayed he'd be too drunk to notice her, prayed for anything but his attention. The house came into view. Dark. Silent. She unlocked the gate and slipped inside. The living room was empty. The television was off. Relief flooded through her. She climbed the stairs quietly, each step deliberate. Reached her door. Locked it behind her. Only then did she exhale. She sank onto her bed, back against the wall, and closed her eyes. But her mind drifted back to the parking lot. To amber gold eyes. To the boy who had smiled at her like she mattered. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself wonder. What if? Chapter 3. A house that hated her. By the time Sarah reached the front gate, full darkness had swallowed Crescent Hollow. The street lights flickered weakly overhead, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for her. She wasn't afraid of the dark. She was afraid of what waited inside. Her shoes crunched softly on the gravel driveway. That's when she heard it. The television. Blaring. Too loud. Some more movie. Explosions rattling the windows. Gunfire and screaming dialogue turned up to maximum volume. Her stomach dropped. Marcus was home. Sarah stood frozen at the front door, hand hovering over the handle. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But where would she go? She had no money, no family, no friends. She tightened her grip on her backpack and pushed the door open. The smell hit her first. Stale beer, cigarette smoke, the sour tang of unwashed dishes. The living room flickered with the violent colors of the television screen, but the couch was empty. Marcus wasn't there. Her pulse quickened. She moved quickly through the hallway, staying close to the wall, praying he'd passed out in his bedroom. She made it to the stairs, started climbing. Each creak of the old wood felt like a warning shot. Her bedroom door was ajar. Sarah's blood turned to ice. That door was always locked. She always checked it before leaving. Panic clawed up her spine. She pushed the door open slowly. Marcus sat on her bed. He leaned back casually, arms crossed, legs spread wide like he owned the space. His thinning hair was greasy and uncombed. His eyes, small, dark, mean, were locked on her. "Come in," he said softly. Too softly. That quiet tone was worse than his shouting. It meant something bad was coming. Sarah stepped inside, closing the door behind her even though every instinct told her to run. She dropped her backpack by the wall. Her hands trembled. "You took food from my cabinet," he said. Not a question. An accusation. Sarah opened her mouth. Closed it. Her voice wouldn't come. It never did. "I was hungry," she finally managed to rasp, the words foreign on her tongue. His head tilted. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "You were hungry," he repeated mockingly. "And you think that gives you the right to steal from me?" She shook her head quickly. "No." He stood slowly, deliberately. "Then what gives you the right, little rat?" Sarah didn't answer. Couldn't answer. He moved toward her. She bolted. But Marcus was faster than his bulk suggested. His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, yanking her backward. She twisted free, her bag skidding across the floor. She ran. Down the stairs, feet pounding, heart hammering. Behind her, she heard the whistle of leather cutting air. The belt cracked across her shoulders. Pain exploded white-hot across her back. She screamed but didn't stop running. The kitchen. She slammed through the door and locked it behind her, hands fumbling with the bolt. Then silence. Just her ragged breathing. The distant drone of the television. The sound of her own heartbeat. She slid down the cabinet door and curled into herself, knees pulled tight to her chest. Her shirt stuck to her back where the belt had landed. She didn't look. Didn't want to know. In the cold darkness of the kitchen, she stayed. Too frightened to move. Too exhausted to cry. Eventually, her head dropped to her knees. And there, on the hard tile floor, she slept. Morning came pale and watery through the kitchen window. Sarah woke stiff and aching. Her neck screamed from sleeping at an awkward angle. Her back throbbed with a deep, burning pain. She listened. Silence upstairs. The low rumble of Marcus's snoring drifted down from his bedroom. He'd passed out again. She stood slowly, wincing. Walked upstairs as quietly as possible, not looking at his closed door. In the bathroom, she turned on the shower and let the water run hot. She peeled off her clothes carefully, hissing when the fabric pulled away from dried blood. In the mirror, she saw the red welt across her shoulders. She didn't cry, just stepped into the shower and let the scalding water wash everything away. When she dressed, she chose clothes that covered everything. Long sleeves, high collar. Her movements were practiced, mechanical. Another day, another battle. She left the house before Marcus woke. The world outside was unchanged. Birds sang. Cars passed. The sun rose like it had no idea what kind of monsters lived behind closed doors. Sarah walked toward school, stepped steady. But in the back of her mind, a pair of amber gold eyes waited. Watching. Chapter 4. The Wolf in the Woods. It happened on a Thursday evening, one of those heavy, windless hours when the world felt like it was holding its breath. The sun was sinking behind the hills of Crescent Hollow, bleeding orange and pink across the sky. Mist curled along the tree roots and forest paths, muffling sound. Sarah walked alone through the woods, a shortcut she took sometimes when she needed to think. It wasn't the safest route, but it was quiet, hidden, far from prying eyes. Usually, a few other students used this path, but today they'd moved on ahead. She had lingered, watching the sky change colors, trying to breathe something other than fear. The forest was oddly peaceful. Birds rustled in branches. Twigs snapped in the distance. Then she heard it, a low, pained whimper. Sarah stopped. The sound was faint but unmistakable. Animal, but not like any she'd heard before. Her heart stuttered. She scanned the dense brush to her left. That's when she saw him. A massive wolf lay half-hidden beneath fallen branches and dead leaves. His fur was deep charcoal gray with silver streaks along his spine. Blood matted his front leg, where a cruel metal trap had clamped down with rusted teeth. The trap had bitten deep into muscle. Every breath the wolf took was labored shallow. Sarah should have run, should have screamed, should have done anything except what she did next. She stepped closer, slowly, carefully, like approaching a wildfire. The wolf's eyes opened. They were amber gold, glowing faintly in the dimming light. He didn't growl, didn't bare his teeth, just watched her with an awareness that felt almost human. Sarah knelt beside him, hands raised, palms up. "Hey," she whispered. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." He blinked slowly. "I'm going to help you," she said softly. "All right." She found a thick branch and wedged it into the trap mechanism. She pushed with all her strength. Nothing. The branch cracked and splintered in her hands. "Damn it," she muttered. The wolf whimpered again. She threw the broken wood aside and searched frantically. Finally, she found a rusted metal rod half buried in the dirt. She dug it out and returned to the trap. She braced herself. Tried again. The rod bent but held. She pushed harder, sweat dripping down her temple, breath coming in gasps. "Come on," she growled through gritted teeth. "Come on." With one last push, the trap creaked open just enough. The wolf pulled his leg free with a wet, sickening sound. He collapsed onto the leaves, panting. Sarah quickly grabbed her water bottle and poured the last few drops over the wound. She tore the bottom hem of her shirt and wrapped the gash tightly. "It's okay now," she whispered. "You're going to be okay." The wolf's breathing slowed. Not relaxed, but no longer fighting. He watched her with eyes that made her feel seen in a way she couldn't explain. She sat beside him for a while, hands stained with blood and dirt. Eventually, the wolf stirred, rising shakily to his feet. "You can't walk alone," she murmured. "Come on." Together, they walked through the woods. Him limping, her steady. She guided him to an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town, a place she'd discovered months ago. Forgotten. Safe. She pried open the side door and helped him inside. The warehouse smelled of dust and decay, but it was dry and quiet. She laid down an old tarp from the corner and helped the wolf settle onto it. "I'll be back," she said softly, brushing her hand over his bloodied fur. He didn't flinch. She slipped out and jogged to Finch's Market. Her heart still thundered, but her hands moved fast. She grabbed raw meat cuts from the cooler. Mrs. Finch was in the back. Sarah left a note. "Taking these. We'll pay later." Back at the warehouse, she knelt beside the wolf and offered him the meat. He sniffed, then ate slowly, hungrily. She covered him with the remainder of the tarp and whispered, "You'll be okay now. I'll check on you again." She stood, tired and dirty, but something in her chest felt lighter. She didn't know she'd just saved Kieran, the younger brother of Alpha Dante of the Shadowpine Pack. She didn't know Kieran had shifted to escape an ambush and collapsed near her path. And she didn't know that from the shadows of the trees, several pairs of eyes had watched her every move. Dante stood hidden among the pines, his Beta Ash and pack members flanking him. They had followed Kieran's scent trail. What they found was a human girl kneeling beside their wounded packmate like a guardian angel. Dante's jaw clenched as he watched Sarah tear her shirt to dress the wound. As she touched Kieran without fear. As she led him to shelter and returned with food. His men exchanged glances, but Dante's eyes never left her. When Sarah finally closed the warehouse doors and walked away, wiping blood from her hands, the shadows swallowed her steps. But Dante's gaze followed her like a brand. Something had shifted. Something had begun. Chapter 5. The Wolf Who Watched. Dante had seen many things in his lifetime. He had stood at the edge of territorial wars, fangs bared, blood on his hands. He had fought through betrayal from those who once called him brother. He had witnessed the fall of alphas, the rise of cowards, and the brutal calculus of loyalty turned to ash. But never, never, had he seen someone like her. Sarah. She wasn't fierce the way wolves were. She didn't growl or bare fangs. But she carried her pain like armor, wore her silence like a weapon, moved through the world as if she owed it nothing but still gave everything to survive. And that day in the woods, when she knelt beside his wounded brother without hesitation, without fear, something in Dante's world shifted. She didn't flinch from blood, didn't tremble at Kieran's enormous wolf form. She helped. She gave. She looked into Kieran's eyes like he was just a creature in pain. And in that moment, Kieran had not been the Alpha's brother. He had been a boy who needed help, and she had been the only soul kind enough to stay. Dante had watched it all from the shadows, and afterward he couldn't stop. At first it was surveillance, protective observation. He trailed her from a distance, making sure she made it home safely from Finch's market. She always walked alone, head down, shoulders tense, backpack looking too heavy for her frame. Then one afternoon, she cut through an alley behind the old gymnasium. Dante sensed the shift before he saw it. 3 teenage boys waited by the dumpster. One held a baseball bat he didn't need for any game. The others were already laughing. Dante didn't hesitate. By the time Sarah emerged on the other side of the alley, untouched, unaware, the 3 boys were on their knees behind the dumpster, pale-faced and trembling. One had wet himself. Their bikes lay in pieces, tires slashed, chains missing. None of them ever went near her again. That week, Dante stayed closer. He learned her routines. The way she listened to music too loud to drown out the world. The way she always looked over her shoulder before entering her house, as if hoping it would be empty forever. And when it wasn't, when Marcus came stumbling down the stairs, yelling loud enough for neighbors 3 houses down to hear, Dante heard it too. He didn't shift that night. Didn't need to. He made 2 calls. Pack members who owed him more than loyalty. He pointed them toward the bar Marcus would inevitably end up at. By the time Marcus came home, he was limping. His nose was broken. His wallet was gone. His pride shattered. Sarah never saw Dante. Never heard his name. But that week she felt it. The quiet. The space to breathe. The way her shoulders didn't rise quite so high, and her eyes stayed open a little longer. She didn't smile, not fully, but something loosened in her step. Dante noticed every flicker of change. From the high branch of a tree outside her school, he watched her walk across the courtyard, earbuds in, a worn book pressed to her chest. When the wind blew her copper hair across her cheek, she tucked it behind her ear in that same unconscious motion she always did. She wasn't like anyone he knew. She was human, fragile, but not weak. There was something else in her, something unnamed. She carried a quiet weight, like she'd seen too much, survived too much, and didn't know what to do with it anymore. Her pain wasn't loud, but it had shape, and Dante could feel it in his chest like an echo. That was what held him there. That was what made him send his pack again and again whenever danger flickered too close to her. Not because she needed saving, but because no one should bear that kind of weight alone. It was a Thursday evening when the rain came. Sarah had no umbrella. She walked home in her hoodie pulled tight, shoes squelching through puddles. The street lights flickered weakly. Thunder rolled lazily across the horizon. Dante followed from the rooftops. Silent, fast, unseen. When a stray dog behind her started barking, low and menacing, Dante landed behind it in a blur. His eyes flashed amber. The dog whimpered and ran. Sarah never turned around, just kept walking. And he kept watching. In the warehouse where Kieran had bled, Dante now stood alone, staring at the makeshift bed she'd made for his brother. The torn piece of her shirt still lay in the corner, blood-stained and faded. He picked it up, held it gently. It was just fabric, nothing more. But to him, it was proof of something rare. Something good in a world that had forgotten how to be kind. He closed his fist around it. He remembered the night Sarah returned to the warehouse, bringing fresh bandages, water, and a sandwich wrapped in foil. Kieran was gone. Dante had sent pack members to retrieve him hours before. But she didn't seem upset. She just folded the tarp neatly and whispered, "Hope you're okay." Then she left. She didn't know Dante had been there minutes before, hidden in the rafters, watching her. He would continue watching, always from the shadows. Not as a stalker, not as a stranger, but as something else. Something he couldn't name yet. Something that felt terrifyingly close to human. Chapter 6, The Sunset Bench. It started as a feeling. Small things at first. A coat draped silently over her shoulders when the wind turned cold. An umbrella appearing above her head before rain touched her skin. A presence she couldn't name, but somehow trusted. At school, the world hadn't changed, but it had softened at the edges. Sarah no longer found cruel notes in her locker. The students who used to whisper when she passed now kept their distance, eyes darting away when she looked at them. Something unseen stood between her and the cruelty now. Something and though she didn't know his name, not yet, she felt him watching. Not in a way that frightened her, but in a way that let her breathe. That evening, after a long shift at Finch's Market, after stacking crates, sweeping corners, and washing her hands raw from scrubbing floors, Sarah took her usual meal. Chicken pasta with a side of coleslaw in a plastic container. Mrs. Finch smiled warmly. Eat something good before you head out. You're working yourself to the bone, child. Sarah nodded her thanks and left the store, crossing the quiet road until she reached the old bench near the abandoned train depot. Most people ignored this spot. Weathered wood, half hidden by tall grass and wildflowers. But it had the best view of the sunset in Crescent Hollow. She sat, fork in one hand, thoughts scattered. The sky burned orange and violet, streaked with deep crimson. The kind of sky her mother used to love. Sarah could almost hear her voice. Look, baby. The sky is apologizing for yesterday. Her chest ached. She didn't cry. Not yet. Just sat and remembered. She didn't hear him approach. Only noticed the subtle shift in the air, the weight of someone settling onto the bench beside her. She tensed for half a second, turning her head. Him. The man from the parking lot. The one with amber gold eyes and a presence like gravity. He sat close enough to feel, far enough to respect her space. Sarah looked at him, really looked, and her breath caught. He was striking in a way that felt dangerous. Strong jawline shadowed with stubble. Black hair slightly tousled like it was used to wind. And those eyes. Deep, luminous, patient. He didn't speak. Neither did she. The silence wrapped around them. Not awkward, but honest. A shared space between two people who carried too much. The only sound was distant traffic and the chirping of crickets warming up for the night. Sarah didn't know why, but she started to cry. No sobbing, no gasping. Just slow, exhausted tears running silently down her cheeks. She didn't look at him. Didn't need to. A moment later, a folded handkerchief appeared in her peripheral vision. Crisp white, embroidered with simple initials, DS. She took it, wiped her face slowly. He still didn't speak. That made it better. She didn't want words. She wanted someone to understand. And somehow he did. When the last golden rays faded into violet dusk, Sarah stood. Her fingers curled around the handkerchief, then released it. She held it back out to him. He accepted it without a word. She looked him in the eyes for a long second. Thank you, she whispered. Then she turned and walked away. Dante didn't move at first. He watched her walk, slowly, as if the weight of her day was finally catching up. He kept his distance, hands in his jacket pockets, footsteps soundless. He didn't want her to know. He just needed to see her safely home. Each street lamp they passed flickered like candles against the creeping dark. Somewhere nearby, dogs barked. A radio played faint music from an open window. Sarah crossed the narrow alley that led to her street. Her house came into view. Dante stopped across the street, fading into shadow. He watched her unlock the gate, slip inside, and disappear. Only then did he exhale. What neither of them knew was that behind the thin curtain of a window, Marcus Whitlock watched. He sat in his armchair, beer forgotten beside him. His eyes narrowed, fists clenched. The man who walked behind Sarah. Too tall to be a student, too confident, too calm. Marcus couldn't hear what they said, if they said anything at all. But he saw how the stranger followed her like a bodyguard, like a silent shadow. Part of Marcus wanted to burst through the door, confront him, throw fists and threats, mark his territory like the beast he was. But something stopped him. The look in that man's eyes. Even from a distance, the stillness of him. It made Marcus uneasy. So instead, he sat back down and drank. Drank until his vision blurred. Drank until the rage turned soft. Eventually, his eyelids drooped and closed. Outside, Dante lingered. He didn't approach the house. Didn't test the gate or knock on the door. Instead, he walked 2 houses down. An elderly woman named Mrs. Harlow sat on her porch, knitting in the dim light. Dante greeted her with a nod. Good evening. She eyed him suspiciously until he smiled and offered to help bring in her grocery bags from earlier. 5 minutes later, she was telling him everything about Sarah's stepfather. The way he kept the girl quiet and invisible. The nights she heard shouting. The mornings she pretended not to notice. Dante listened. When the street grew quiet, and no noise came from Sarah's house. He nodded to himself. Marcus had passed out. Dante turned and disappeared into the fog rolling across Crescent Hollow. The shadows no longer felt dangerous. Not to Sarah, and not to Dante. Something had begun to shift between them. Not love. Not yet. But something just as rare. Recognition. Chapter 7. The Storm Breaks. Sarah couldn't explain it. Not with words, not even to herself, but she felt him. Even when she didn't see him. The world had begun to shift around her in quiet ways. Where once the streets home from Finch's Market felt cold and threatening, they now held a strange warmth. As if someone had drawn an invisible boundary around her. A shield. She'd never known protection before. Never had it. But now, every time her fingers trembled locking the front door, every time she heard footsteps behind her and found no one, only to spot a figure later watching from the trees or shadows, she felt safe. It was confusing. He never spoke. Never stepped too close after the sunset by the bench. He was always distant but near. Present in a way she didn't know how to name. She kept noticing the faint outline of someone outside Finch's Market as she walked out with her food. The figure seated on a bench across the street as she swept the shop floor before closing. The tall man behind her as she crossed the alley, just far enough not to be threatening, but never far enough to be absent. She didn't know his name. Still didn't know he was the brother of the wolf she'd helped. But something inside her had already begun to shift. Quietly, slowly, like frost melting from a window. One evening, everything changed. Sarah had dropped her pen walking out of Finch's Market. She hadn't even noticed, her mind foggy from exhaustion. But when she sat on her usual bench with hot chocolate and a turkey sandwich, watching the sun dip low, she heard footsteps crunch softly in the gravel behind her. She turned. He was there, amber gold eyes, hands in his coat pockets. That same calm energy that had shared a bench with her in total silence. This time he held something out. A pen. Her pen. "I think this is yours," he said. His voice was low and rough, but oddly gentle. Sarah looked at it, then at him. It wasn't the pen that made her breath catch. It was the moment. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded. "I'm Dante Shadowpine." She paused. "I'm Sarah Whitlock." That was it. Just names. A returned pen. But the air between them seemed to change. When she returned home that night, her feet were heavier. She kept glancing back, not out of fear, but because she wanted to see if he was still there. He was. Always a few steps behind. Hands in pockets. Hood drawn up against the breeze. A few days later, Dante stepped inside Finch's Market just as Sarah was clocking out. Mrs. Finch raised an eyebrow as the tall stranger approached the counter. "I'm a friend of Sarah's," Dante said, not entirely sure what to call himself. Mrs. Finch's face softened instantly. "Oh, you're the one she's been running into lately." He nodded once. "She doesn't say much," Mrs. Finch added, pouring coffee. "But she's been smiling more, eating all her food, even talks sometimes. I figured someone was watching out for her." Dante didn't respond. He didn't have to. Mrs. Finch smiled wider. "Good. She needs someone around." But not everyone was smiling. Inside the house that had never been a home, Marcus had started to notice too. The subtle shift in Sarah. The quiet change. The faint peace in her shoulders. The stillness in her eyes that used to scream. It made him uneasy. He fed on fear. Her fear. And now it was slipping. He'd seen her walk home that night. Seen the tall man shadowing her from across the street again. Marcus's jaw clenched. His drink spilled. Rage built in the back of his throat. He waited. Waited until she thought he was passed out drunk in front of the TV. Waited until the footsteps had... The storm outside had started as a whisper, but by nightfall it roared. Thunder rolled over the hills like distant war drums. Rain slashed against the windows, angry and cold. Trees groaned in protest as wind bent them back. Sarah stepped through the front door, shaking off her jacket, soaked from the short walk in the downpour. The house was dark. Quiet. She took that as a gift. She went upstairs, closed her door, changed into dry clothes. That's when she heard it. Click. The unmistakable sound of the front door locking. Her heart dropped into her stomach. A moment later, heavy footsteps on the stairs. Her body moved on instinct. She backed toward the window, fingers fumbling to open it. But it was stuck, swollen from the rain. The door burst open before she could force it. Marcus filled the frame. He was soaked, wild-eyed, holding something in his hand. A new belt. Thicker. Meaner. You bringing men around now, huh? He slurred. You think I don't see? I saw him following you. Protecting you like you're something worth saving. Sarah backed against the dresser, chest rising fast. You're cursed, he snarled. It should have been you who died. Not your mother. Then he swung. The belt cracked across her shoulder. Her scream drowned in thunder. She stumbled, crashing into the wall, ribs protesting. He hit her again. Again. Her legs gave out. Her vision blurred. Something in her snapped. She didn't scream anymore. Didn't beg. She ran. Blood dripping from her nose. Breath coming in ragged sobs. Sarah bolted down the stairs. Marcus's voice echoed after her. Angry. Broken. The front door was locked. She turned to the back, found the screen door hanging loose, and slammed it open. Then she was in the rain. Running. Barefoot. Shirt torn. Wind howling through the trees like wolves mourning. She didn't stop. Her lungs burned. Her feet tore against rock and root. But she kept running. Through pain. Through breathlessness. Through memory. She didn't look back. And then she saw it. A cabin. Light spilling from its windows. She clung to the porch rail, dragging her body forward. Her blood washed down her legs with the rain. Her hand found the doorknob. It was warm. She turned it. The door swung open. Inside, 5 men turned mid-laugh. Soda cans in hand. Feet up on the coffee table. The room alive with warmth, light, and music. They were tall. Broad. Handsome. Faces she half recognized from that parking lot days ago. Everything fell silent. No one moved. Sarah stood in the doorway like a ghost. Rain-soaked. Bleeding. Bruised. She looked like prey who'd outrun the predator, only to stumble into a den of wolves. Then Dante stepped in from the kitchen. 2 bottles of cola in his hands. What's with the silence, guys? He saw her. The bottles hit the floor and shattered. Red fizz bleeding out like broken veins. Sarah, he breathed. His voice was thunder. Shock. Rage. Fear. She opened her mouth. No sound came, but they all heard it inside their heads. Her voice, clear, trembling, desperate, rippled through their minds like wind through leaves. Help me. And then her eyes closed. She collapsed. Dante caught her before the floor could. His arms wrapped around her broken form, cradling her like she might vanish. Her blood soaked through his shirt, warm and real. His heart thundered against her ear. Sarah. No. No, no. The pack stood frozen, stunned by what they just felt. She had used the mind link. All of them heard it. But she was human. Only an alpha's mate could reach them that way. Only his mate. And yet she had never once given off his scent. Never once triggered the bond. Not until now. Dante's eyes blazed. He turned to his men. Voice a roar. Sweep the perimeter. Now. Someone dared hurt her. Someone dared touch what's mine. The room exploded into motion. In the forest nearby, Marcus had reached the tree lean, panting from rage and adrenaline. He'd followed her, belt still in hand, shouting her name through the storm. But when he saw the cabin, saw the men, saw the massive trucks parked outside, saw the amber-eyed giant holding Sarah like she was something precious, he froze. Even in his drunken haze, he could tell. He was outnumbered, outclassed, out of time. He turned back into the dark. Inside, Dante looked down at Sarah's face. Her bruises, her lashes trembling against pale cheeks, her breath coming in soft, labored hitches. He felt something crack open inside him. He should have known, should have realized. If he had known she was his, he never would have stayed in the shadows. Never would have waited. Never would have let her go home to that monster. Dante bent his forehead to hers. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm here now. Rio, his beta called. The truck's ready. Dante nodded once, lifting Sarah as gently as he could. She weighed nothing in his arms. A paper doll. A bruised flower. He carried her out into the storm, rain pouring over both of them like baptism. Lightning struck the ridge above. Dante's body convulsed. His bones cracked, splintering, reshaping. His jaw elongated. His spine stretched. Claws tore through skin. His amber eyes widened, burning with fury and instinct. In moments, where once stood a man, now towered a wolf twice the size of any shifter. Thicker fur. Broader shoulders. A beast made of rage and protection. He shook the rain off his coat and roared. Rio threw the truck into gear, tires spinning as they carved through muddy slopes. Dante ran beside the vehicle, massive paws pounding the ground so hard it trembled. The trees blurred past. Branches snapped. The storm howled behind them. But Dante was faster. He reached the Shadowpine estate first. 2 doctors were already waiting by the tall iron gates, medical bags in hand. The pack healer and the human trauma physician they kept on retainer. Rio skidded the truck to a halt. Dante was already there, back in human form, soaked and shirtless, carrying Sarah like glass. "3rd floor," he said. No one questioned him. They opened the doors. He took her to his own chamber. Massive, warm, walls painted in dark oak and lined with books and art she would never have guessed he owned. The bed was freshly made, thick with furs and soft sheets. He laid her down gently, brushing wet strands from her forehead. She whimpered once. Just once. Dante's breath caught. The doctors worked quickly. The bruises, the swelling, the cracked ribs, the belt welts on her back. Dante paced like a caged animal, fists clenched, jaw set. At one point, Rio placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're shaking the floor." "She used the link," Dante said, voice gravel. She called out. "I heard her. We all did." "But her scent," Rio started. "I know," Dante snapped. "I don't care. She's mine." Hours later, the storm passed. The doctors left. Sarah was asleep, breath slow but steady. Her hands curled gently under her chin. Someone had changed her into a clean shirt, wrapped her ribs, bandaged her lip. She looked peaceful. Finally, Dante sat beside the bed. He didn't touch her, just watched her, guarded her, waited. The answers would come. But for now she was safe. And nothing, no man, no storm, no force in this world, would hurt her again. Chapter 8. The Truth Beneath Silence. Sarah woke to birdsong. For a moment, she didn't move. She lay very still beneath soft, downy covers wrapped in warmth that didn't come from her own body, but from the bed itself. Thick sheets, a comforter that smelled like fresh laundry and something faintly earthy, like pine and rain. Her fingers curled into the fabric. She opened her eyes slowly. The ceiling above her wasn't cracked or stained. It was smooth, high, painted in elegant cream. There was a chandelier, not gaudy but tasteful, casting golden light from low-burning bulbs. Across the room stood tall oak wardrobes, a dresser, and a bookshelf lined with leather-bound volumes. The curtains were drawn, but golden light peeked from the edges. Sarah blinked, then sat up. Pain lanced through her ribs like fire. She gasped and fell back into the pillows, groaning softly. "Where am I?" She reached down and felt bandages wrapped tightly around her ribcage. Her bruises had been cleaned. She was in fresh clothes, an oversized shirt she didn't recognize. Then it hit her. The woods, the storm, the cabin door swinging open. Amber eyes, arms catching her just before she hit the ground. Dante. And suddenly she heard it. Not in the room. In her head. "Morning, Sarah." Her heart slammed against her chest. She sat up too fast and cried out. The voice was calm, young, familiar. "Kieran." Then, before she could process anything, another voice joined. "It's me, Dante." She froze. Her eyes widened. This wasn't a dream. She wasn't hallucinating. Her breath came fast, fingers clawing at the sheets. She was hearing voices in her head. "No," she whispered aloud, shaking her head. "No, no, no. Look out the window." Sarah turned slowly. The curtains were thick velvet, but light poured from their edges. She reached out, every movement stiff, and tugged one side back. Sunlight streamed into the room. The window overlooked a massive estate. Manicured gardens. Stone paths weaving through flower beds. Pine trees lining the back edge of the property. A sleek black GMC truck parked on a gravel loop below. And there, leaning against the side of the mansion, standing in a black shirt with the sleeves rolled, was Dante. He was looking up, straight at her. Pain flared again. She lost her balance. Sarah fell with a thud to the floor, landing hard on her side. She gasped, biting down a scream as pain ricocheted from her ribs to her spine. Footsteps thundered down the hall. The door slammed open. "Sarah!" Dante was there in an instant, rushing to her side. His hands were gentle as he helped her up, lifting her slowly back onto the bed with effortless strength. Her chest heaved, not from pain but from panic. Her eyes searched his face. "Dante," she whispered. "What's happening to me?" He sat beside her, crouched at her level, eyes steady and unblinking. "Why did I hear your voice in my head?" she asked, voice trembling. "What are you?" He exhaled slowly, as if he'd rehearsed this answer for a long time. "I'm a wolf," he he said quietly. A werewolf shifter. Sarah stared at him. You're serious? He nodded. Our kind has existed for thousands of years. We originate from Shadowpine territory, hidden deep in the northern forests. We've lived alongside humans for centuries. In secret. She blinked. I'm human, Dante, she whispered. I was born human. My stepfather is just a regular man. Brutal. Drunk. But normal. Dante nodded, waiting. But my mother. She looked away. My mother died when I was little. I don't remember her much. Marcus never talks about her. After she died, he changed. Got worse. Started drinking. Started blaming me. Dante leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. Then that's where we'll start. We'll find out who she was, Sarah. Together. I promise. Her eyes shimmered, but she swallowed the tears. Dante let the silence sit. Then he added softly, Last night you spoke to me. Not with words. You reached me, and every wolf in my pack, through the mind link. I thought I said it out loud, she whispered. He shook his head. Only the mate of an alpha can do that. Sarah froze. What? He nodded slowly. And yet you did. Before she could process it, a soft knock sounded on the door. Kieran stepped in, sunlight catching in his auburn hair. He looked so much like Dante, only younger. Just a boy, but his eyes held something ancient. In his hand was a small bouquet of daisies. White and yellow. Hi, Sarah, he said shyly. Sarah's breath caught. I remember you, she said slowly. You were the boy who almost tripped at school. He grinned. That was me. He came closer and handed her the flowers. I got these for you. She took them slowly, fingers trembling slightly. Thank you. You saved me, Kieran said softly. Back then, and when I was the wolf. I owe you my life. Sarah blinked at him, then turned to Dante, eyes wide. He's the wolf from the woods. Dante nodded. Yes. That evening, he ran into rogue wolves from Ashclaw, an exiled group. They've been crossing Shadowpine borders, causing chaos. Their leader, Sarah turned back to Kieran, eyebrows raised. You fought them? You. Kieran shrugged modestly. I can fight, he said. We train young. Dante smirked. Every wolf in my pack learns early. Self-defense isn't a choice. It's a necessity. Kieran grinned. I could show you around when you feel better. She needs rest. Dante interjected gently. Kieran nodded, not offended. Nice to officially meet you, Sarah. You too, she said softly. Dante ruffled his brother's hair and nudged him toward the door. Out. Go bother Ash. Fine, Kieran called over his shoulder, waving. The door clicked softly shut. Moments later, it opened again. Dante returned, this time pushing a polished silver cart lined with warm dishes. Freshly cut fruit, croissants, orange juice, eggs, pancakes, crispy bacon. The aroma filled the room. Sarah stared, stunned. Not because of the food, but because someone had done all this for her. Dante wheeled it beside the bed. I wasn't sure what you liked, he said. So I brought a little of everything. Her eyes filled with tears. Not of pain. Of something far rarer. Gratitude. Hope. I don't even know what to say, she whispered. Dante smiled, brushing a copper lock of hair from her face. You don't have to. Just eat. He stepped back toward the door. Dante. He turned. Thank you. His gaze held hers a second longer. Then he nodded and quietly closed the door behind him. Sarah sat there, the daisies in one hand, a fork in the other. She ate slowly, thoughtfully, not because she was unsure, but because she hadn't felt this full in a very long time. Full of warmth, of safety, of possibility. And yet, Dante's words stayed with her. Only an alpha's mate can use the mind link. Her mother's past, her stepfather's hatred, her own hidden self. She had questions now, and slowly, she knew the answers were going to come. Chapter 9. The name she didn't know. Days passed. They were soft at first, like tentative rays of sun peeking through clouds that had loomed for far too long. Sarah began to heal. Not just her ribs or the bruises on her arms, but the quiet, raw wounds inside her. The ones no one could see. The ones she'd buried beneath silence, survival, and self-preservation. She learned the ways of the shifters. Dante taught her about the Shadowpine Pack. Their role as guardians of the ancient forests stretching across Crescent Hollow. They weren't monsters or myths. They were watchers, protectors, warriors of balance. The Shadowpine wolves didn't rule from fear. They protected through legacy. And Dante, he was their alpha. Fierce, respected, unshaken. But with her, he was something else entirely. Gentle, patient, soft-spoken in the mornings, quietly watchful at night. He never pushed, never pried. He waited until she was ready to speak, ready to share. And somehow she did. It started with a sentence, then a laugh, then full conversations by the fire, where Dante's dry humor coaxed her into telling him stories from school, the ones she had buried beneath years of pain. He made her laugh, truly laugh, the kind that surprised her every time it left her lips. Her silence was no longer a cage. It had become a thread between them, a quiet understanding. And some nights, when the darkness still triggered memories, when she woke drenched in sweat and gasping for breath, he was there, sitting beside her, just holding her hand, saying nothing, and yet saying everything. One morning, Dante appeared with a cocky smirk and keys to one of the trucks in hand. "Come on," he said. "You're going shopping." She blinked. "With who?" "With me and Kieran," he replied like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Kieran peeked from behind him, already halfway into his sunglasses. "Let's go, Cinderella." Sarah rolled her eyes, but Dante caught the way her cheeks turned pink. The ride to the mall was surprisingly normal. She sat up front, window cracked, the wind playing with her copper curls. Kieran played DJ from the back seat, switching between indie tracks and early 2000s pop, while groaning dramatically when Dante vetoed his choices. At the mall, they went all out. They insisted she pick anything she wanted, but more often than not, they picked for her. Kieran threw pastel dresses over her arm, calling her their human Cinderella. Dante had a surprisingly sharp eye for style. Soft cardigans, light jeans, flowy skirts, and a strange attachment to hoodies, especially when he found one in her favorite shade of forest green. When she came out of the dressing room in it, he nodded. "That's the one." She stared at him. "Just saying," he added with a shrug. "You look like yourself in it." It was the first time in a long while she didn't flinch when they grabbed lunch at a small restaurant tucked near the edge of the mall. Sarah had a grilled chicken wrap with sweet potato fries. Kieran wolfed down 2 bacon cheeseburgers. And Dante, to no one's surprise, ordered black coffee and a Caesar salad. "Does he ever eat like a real person?" Sarah asked Kieran, smirking. Kieran leaned in, whispering like it was top secret. "I've never seen him eat dessert. I'm convinced he's emotionally allergic to joy." Dante just lifted an eyebrow. "And yet I put up with you." They all laughed. But they didn't know. They were being watched. A man leaned against a pillar on the second floor of the mall, camera glasses tracking every move. He whispered into a small mic clipped to his jacket. "Cross. The Shadowpine airs are with some new girl." Static. Then a low, gravelly voice. "Who is she? Is she familiar?" The man looked again. Dante's hand brushed against Sarah's as they walked. Kieran nudged her and she laughed, nearly dropping a shopping bag. "No. She's new. But they're close. Like family." "Damn it," Cross growled. "The Shadowpines don't have family. They're all that's left. Keep watching. Report everything." The line went dead. By late afternoon, the trio left the mall, bags stacked in the truck bed. Kieran convinced them to stop at Clearwater Lake, the edge of which met the ocean in shimmering turquoise waves. The sand was soft and white, and for once the wind smelled of salt and sunscreen rather than pine and smoke. They changed in private beach stalls. Kieran came out in bright blue board shorts and a bucket hat. Dante wore black trunks and aviator sunglasses, so lean and powerful it turned more than a few heads. Sarah emerged slowly, wearing a sundress that flowed with the wind. Her shoulders were bare, and faint purple bruises still marred the tops of her arms. She folded them instinctively. Dante noticed. He said nothing, just handed her a wide-brimmed straw hat and gave her the tiniest, kindest nod. "You look perfect." They bought ice cream cones from a weathered cart parked under a palm tree. Sarah was halfway into a mint chip scoop when the vendor looked up. His eyes widened. "Ilara." She blinked. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping forward. "What did you call me?" The man's face flushed. "Sorry. I thought. You look just like someone I used to know. Years ago." He smiled, trying to brush it off. "She used to come here every weekend. Always sat right over there." He pointed to a rocky ledge near the water. Sarah's heart thudded. "That was my mother," she said softly. The vendor's face changed, grief and wonder mixing in his eyes. "She was kind," he said. "Quiet. Always alone, but never sad." She said this beach gave her peace. Alice's throat closed. She died in an accident when I was little. I'm so sorry, he said. The man reached into his cart and pulled out a small wooden box. I always meant to return this, he said. She dropped it one day. Never came back. I kept it, thinking one day I'd see her again. He opened the box and lifted a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon with a star at its center. This belongs to the Linares family, I think, he said quietly. And I believe it's your family's crest. He handed it to her. Sarah took it with trembling fingers. The ride back to the Shadowpine estate was silent. Sarah stared at the pendant in her lap. Its metal was cool, heavy, old. In the passenger seat, she saw Dante glance at her. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. In the back, Kieran broke the silence. So, he said, licking the last of his cone. You're the lost Linares heir. Like, the one they've been looking for decades. Sarah looked back. He grinned. Well, Cinderella, congratulations. You just became old money-rich royalty. Dante smirked faintly from the driver's seat. Sarah stared at them both, smiling and wondering if she really wanted to go looking. Linares. Her mother's name. A family she never knew. A history wrapped in moonlight and silence. She swallowed hard. This was too much. Too fast. Too real. And yet it felt right. Like something inside her had been quietly waiting all along. For truth. For warmth. For belonging. Chapter 10. The Link That Binds. The Shadowpine estate felt different now. Not colder. Not darker. Just fuller. Sarah had been staying in Dante's room for over a week. He'd insisted. She'd protested at first, embarrassed, uncertain, but he'd simply said, You're safest here. He slept on the couch in the adjoining sitting room. Never complained. Never made her feel like a burden. But every morning, she woke to fresh flowers on the nightstand. Every evening, a meal waited for her. And every night, when the nightmares came, he was there within seconds. Silent, steady, a wall between her and the dark. She was beginning to understand what it meant to be protected. Not controlled. Not owned. Protected. That morning, Sarah sat cross-legged on the bed, the silver Linares pendant resting in her palm. She'd been staring at it for an hour, tracing the crescent moon and star with her fingertip. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Come in, she said. Dante entered, carrying a leather-bound book. His expression was calm, but his eyes held something heavier. Knowledge. Maybe concern. I did some research, he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. About the Linares family. Sarah's heart skipped. And he opened the book carefully. The pages were yellowed with age, covered in elegant handwriting and detailed illustrations of crests, bloodlines, and pack histories. The Linares line is one of the oldest wolf families in existence, Dante began. They were known as moon seers, wolves with the ability to sense bonds, predict shifts, and communicate across vast distances through the mind link. They were revered. Powerful. Sarah's breath caught. Were. Dante's jaw tightened. 30 years ago, the Linares family was ambushed. Wiped out by a rival faction led by a rogue alpha named Voss. He wanted their power. Their territory. He slaughtered them all. Sarah's fingers curled around the pendant. All of them. Almost, Dante said quietly. There were rumors that one survived. A woman. She disappeared into the human world, went into hiding, changed her name. No one ever found her. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. My mother. Dante nodded. Ilara Linares. She must have hidden among humans to protect you. If Voss or his descendants ever found out she had a daughter, they'd come for me, Sarah finished. Dante's eyes locked onto hers. Yes. Silence settled between them, thick and heavy. That's why I could use the mind link, Sarah said slowly. Why I could reach you. I'm not just human. You're half wolf, Dante confirmed. Your wolf side has been dormant your entire life. But it's there, waiting. Sarah looked down at her hands. Will I shift? Maybe, Dante said. It depends. Some half-bloods never shift. Others do during extreme stress or emotional awakening. There's no way to know until it happens. She swallowed hard. And the mate bond, Dante's gaze softened. The bond doesn't lie, Sarah. The moment you used the link to call for me, the moment every wolf in my pack heard you, that was the bond recognizing itself. You're my mate. And I'm yours. Her eyes filled with tears. Not of fear. Of relief. I've never belonged anywhere, she whispered. Never had anyone. Dante reached out slowly, cupping her face in his hands. His touch was warm. Steady. You belong here, he said. With me. With this pack. You're not alone anymore, Sarah. You never will be again. A tear slipped down her cheek. He wiped it away with his thumb. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. I don't know how to be this. Neither do I, Dante said with a faint smile. But we'll figure it out. Together. She nodded, leaning into his touch. For the first time in her life, she felt whole. That afternoon, Dante gathered the pack in the great hall. 20 wolves stood in a semicircle, warriors, scouts, healers, elders. All eyes on Sarah as she stood beside Dante at the front of the room. She wore the forest green hoodie he'd bought her and jeans. Her copper hair was pulled into a loose braid. The Linares pendant hung around her neck. Dante's hand rested lightly on her lower back. A silent reassurance. This is Sarah Whitlock, Dante announced, his voice carrying through the hall. Daughter of Alara Linares. The last surviving heir of the Moonseer bloodline. Whispers rippled through the crowd. She is also, Dante continued, his tone firm, my mate. The whispers stopped. Every wolf in the room dropped to one knee in unison. A sign of respect. Of acceptance. Sarah's breath caught. She looked at Dante, eyes wide. He gave her a small, encouraging nod. Rise, Dante said. The pack stood as one. Rio, Dante's beta, stepped forward with a grin. Welcome to the family, Luna. Sarah blinked. Luna. It's what we call the alpha's mate. Kieran chimed in from the side, smiling. Get used to it, Cinderella. Laughter rippled through the hall. Warm. Genuine. Sarah felt her chest tighten. Not with fear, but with something she hadn't felt in years. Belonging. That evening, Sarah stood on the balcony outside Dante's room, looking out over the forest. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Dante joined her, leaning against the railing beside her. Do you think they'll come for me? Sarah asked quietly. Voss's people? Probably, Dante said honestly. But they'll have to go through me first. And this entire pack. You're protected, Sarah. I swear it. She looked at him. Really looked. At the sharp lines of his face. The amber gold eyes that had watched over her from the shadows. The quiet strength that radiated from him like heat. Why me? She asked softly. Out of everyone in the world, why me? Dante turned to face her fully, his expression serious. Because you're kind in a world that tried to break you, he said. Because you saved my brother without hesitation. Because you've survived things that would have destroyed most people. And because, he paused, his voice dropping. Because my soul recognized yours the moment I saw you. Sarah's breath hitched. I don't believe in fate, Dante continued. But I believe in you. And I believe in us. Tears spilled down her cheeks. But this time, they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of hope. Dante pulled her into his arms, and she let herself fall. Let herself be held. Let herself feel safe. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running. She was home. 3 months later. Sarah stood in front of the mirror in Dante's. No, their room, adjusting the silver Linares pendant around her neck. She'd started training with the pack. Learning to fight. Learning to defend herself. Her wolf hadn't surfaced yet, but Dante said it would come when it was ready. She'd also enrolled in online classes to finish her high school diploma. Mrs. Finch had thrown her a small celebration at the market when she found out. Marcus had been arrested 2 weeks after Sarah disappeared. Assault charges. The neighbors had finally spoken up. He was awaiting trial. Sarah didn't feel guilty. She felt free. A knock at the door. Come in, she called. Kieran poked his head in, grinning. Dante says we're leaving in 5. You ready? Ready for what? She asked, suspicious. You'll see. 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself standing at Clearwater Lake again. But this time the entire pack was there. A bonfire roared on the beach. Music played from portable speakers. Laughter filled the air. Dante appeared beside her, slipping his hand into hers. What is this? She asked. A celebration, he said simply. For you. For us. For new beginnings. Sarah looked around at the faces of the pack. Her pack, and felt her chest swell with emotion. Kieran ran past, chasing Rio with a water gun. Ash was arguing with one of the scouts about who could grill the best steak. The pack elders sat in lawn chairs, watching the chaos with fond smiles. This was family. Dante pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. I love you, he murmured against her skin. Sarah's eyes closed. She leaned into him, breathing in pine and rain and safety. "I love you too," she whispered back. And for the first time in her life, Sarah Whitlock, Sarah Linares, believed it. The moon rose over the lake, full and bright, and beneath its light, the broken girl who had run through a storm found her place in the world. Not as a victim, not as a ghost, but as a Luna, as a survivor, as someone loved.